Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey there folks, Colin here from the Home Building Hub, and thanks for joining another episode. I'm here with co-host Darren Brennan, and today we're going to cover off a topic that really outlines and answers some questions for you. What is a facade? And I guess we're going to talk through what the options are and how it works with facades, just to better educate you as you start doing quotes. We're getting quotes from builders and getting through, what things really mean. So how are you going today, Darren?
Going well, mate. Yeah, really well. Thank you. Yeah. Kicking into another one, mate. We feel like they're rolling out pretty quick at the moment, which is great. So really appreciate, so far, the uptake of the podcast has been fantastic, and we've had plenty of feedback. It's probably exceeded my expectations to date, and really, really thankful for anyone who's given up a little bit of their time to have a listen to what we're up to here. So, and I guess the real key is hopefully people are getting value out of that, and I think from some of the questions that are coming through, people are, which is great. So, we really appreciate that, and again, keep firing questions to us. You can jump on the Home Building Hub website and just click the link and shoot us any questions you've got, and we'd be really happy to come back to you with answers, or jump on a phone call with you, to talk through anything we can assist in there. So, yeah, awesome.
Yeah. That's really good. It's great to see. We're seeing questions, a couple of businesses reaching out, just wanting to talk through how they can add some value to home buyers. And yeah, it's good. Really, really good to see so far, Darren. So I guess we'll continue on the journey of this. We're trying to outline for our listeners we did a summary of building quotes and, how to get the best building quotes, and a separate one just outlining what the items are in a building quote and what they mean loosely and from a high level. We're now sort of rolling through the detail of that. So, we've completed one about base prices and what they are, what they mean, so you can really understand that. Now we're going to move into this one here about facades, okay? So it shouldn't really be a long episode, but it'll be quite helpful, quite valuable. So the first question, I guess, for us to answer is, well, what actually is a facade? So essentially a facade, it represents the face of your home, okay? It represents the design articulation, the materials and the finishes and ultimately the colors as well of your home. One thing to note, the term is not, it's pronounced facade. It's not pronounced, as sometimes I've heard over the years, Darren, as facade. That's not how to say it. So it is facade. And it does really provide you as the home buyer the ability to choose the way you want the front of your home to look, and they're interchangeable. So you can pick any floor plan, and a builder will have a standard set of facades and some upgraded ones as well for you to choose from. Okay, so that's essentially how that works and what it means. I guess some other terms that people use regarding facades is street appeal is something I guess you could use. That's what is important to some people, the street appeal of their home. It's very important to the estate in which you live in these days. It used to be not as important, but the street appeal and the way your home looks is quite important to make sure that the overall flow and the aesthetics of the estate, look really good for anyone driving through there. So I guess one of the things that you can do to finish that point off is, let's say, Darren, like we were living next door to each other, we bought exactly the same floor plan, we can go and choose different facades. In fact, the estate would probably force us to do that. You can't have the same facades next door to each other, but that means that you can add your little unique sort of flair to it, Darren, and I can add my sort of preference to how I want the front of my house to look. Okay, so that's what a facade is, and how it works. So Daz, for you, let's jump into a little bit more detail. How many facade options for a home buyer? How many facade options are available to me?
Yeah, for sure. So most builders obviously have a few standard facades, and I guess we'd say maybe 4 to 6, could be 2 to 3 standard facades, and then they'll certainly have some upgraded options above that as well. So they'll come at a cost, and some of those costs are pretty small. Could be, as low as $1,500. Could be a few $1,000, $4 or $5 grand. They could be 70 or 80 grand. Depending on the house. So again, it's reflective of the home. If you're buying a a little 15 square home, it's probably unlikely it's going to have a $70,000 facade on it. But if you're buying a 50 or 60 square home, you might end up with a really, really big facade that's going to be really grand. And it's not, you're going to really know where that money's spent, because you're going to see how, I guess, epic that facade's going to look. I guess these days, standard facades are pretty good. Often they're including things like eaves. They've got brick infills above the windows. They've got a nice a panel lift door, not a roller door on the front. Those sort of things. They'll often have an upgraded front door, even in the standard facade. And then, obviously from there, you can choose the upgrades. But, they're, pardon me, they're, I guess, trying to give you a base level that'll comply for the most part with the developer requirements. You may need some very minor tweaks to get it there. You might need to add some render, for example, or something like that. But, essentially, they're going to have a really nice look about them, as a standard facade anyway. So if you did choose a standard facade from most builders, they're going to be actually okay. You're not discounting yourself. It's just sort of a matter of where do you want to go from there, and what style do you like? Because really that's what it's about. It's about that street appeal, that style, and is that something that's important to you? So, a lot of facades will have multiple materials on it, so it might have a couple of materials, a bit of render and stuff on there to sort of assist, maybe a little bit of timber finishes. That'll just give it a really nice look. With the upgraded facades, really dependent upon the builder and their options as to what you're really going to get. You can get all sorts of stuff. If it's on a 2-story, you might end up with a balcony on the front. You could end up with, the facade could also be adjusting the roof of the home. So you may end up with like a skillion roof, so like I guess, how do I best describe a skillion roof? One that's on a single pitched roof on a lean. Yeah. You might end up with a flat roof or a near flat roof because of the facade. So it can be impacting those sorts of things as well. And the facade can really make the home stand out from the street. So, if that's important to you, and a lot of people want their house to look really cool, then obviously it's worth considering what facade you go with. It might well be the standard's going to do the job for you, and you can pick some really nice bricks or some nice paint colors on the home, and it's going to look great. Or you might want a particular style, and that's super important to you. So then you choose that from there. But I guess, one of the questions, Cole, would be, is it worth, I'd love your personal opinion on this one. Is it worth spending that extra money on an upgraded facade?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. I think first and foremost, before I answer that, understanding at the very basic of all this is that 10 years ago, you could pretty much do what you wanted with a facade. They were just standard brick with one basic window in the front. And if you drove past those homes these days, you'd look at them and go, oh, probably not as nice as what's available and what's on offer now. These days, the standard facades that are available for builders are pretty good. And that's because the builders have put a bit more effort into making them have better street appeal. But secondary to that, it's because the developers of the land estates have forced builders to do that by making sure that their estates are looking really nice and the street appeal is at a better level than what it used to be back in the day. And the way they do that, you can't just usually, I mean, we're speaking Victoria here. I don't know necessarily if it applies across all, but I think it does. You can't just go and build a brick house, all brick across the front, and that's it with a roller door anymore. It just doesn't work like that. You must have a couple of different features, and usually a standard facade will probably most likely be a bit of brick, a bit of render. Some might have a bit of brick and a bit of timber, etc., etc. So some what they call contrasting materials to represent a little bit more, I guess, design, or nicer design, rather than just one solid red brick that used to happen, I suppose. So that's the first thing I want to point out, is that the standard facades are pretty good these days. So my answer to the question, Darren, which was, would it, I guess, is it worth spending money on an upgraded facade, is yes and no. It depends on the buyer type that you are. So for me, and personally, it's just a personal opinion, if you're a first home buyer or an investor, I pretty much see zero benefit in upgrading to a expensive upgraded facade. Maybe you could pick one that's $1 or $2 or $3 because it does add a little few more features and things like that. But the reason I say that I wouldn't do that personally is because I'd prefer to grab that $1 or $2 or $3 and I'd prefer to spend that A, save it, not spend it, or B, pop that into the internal features of the home. Because if I can raise the ceiling height for $3,000 instead of get an upgraded facade, I would much prefer to do that every day of the week, because it's probably going to help with the appeal on the internal side of things, and get, maybe tenants walking through will more appreciate a higher ceiling than they would what the facade looks like, as an example, if you're renting that out. Okay, so that's one side of the coin to look at, and a bit like what you said earlier, Darren. But if you're building a second or third home, or a dream home, or something you really know you're going to live in for a good substantial amount of time, then by all means you should be looking at those upgraded features, because it just gives you that unique element, makes that home yours. You may, like I said before, you may have the same floor plan as your neighbour, but because of the changes you've made to your facade, or the upgrade options you've selected, it can really give it some pop and stand out, and just gives you a little bit. I think it comes down to pride, Daz. I think it just gives you a bit more pride about, yep, that's our home in the street. Look at that, it looks amazing. And touch it up with some nice landscaping, and off you go. So it's a similar view for landscaping for me. We do full turnkey, so I would say that turnkey packs we provide as standard are essentially the equivalent of picking a standard facade. If you're going to go all in and doing a dream house and stuff like that, we would never recommend pick a standard basic landscaping layout. You would go and spend the money on getting a few more features and better species or better plants and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so it does depend on the buyer type.
I think you're right on that. I think you're right on that too, Colin. I know one thing I used to always think in the early days of selling for me was if you, and I'll preference this by saying, so I studied horticulture and worked in the garden industry for years. So I saw how nice a great garden can look, and often what I saw was the best looking houses. Yes, they've got an okay looking facade. They don't have to have necessarily the best facade in the street, but if they've got a hell of a nice garden that's really well maintained, the grass is ripping green and looking amazing, the house can look really good, right? So if you can't afford to, and you might really want, let's call it a balcony, for example. You want a balcony on the front, but maybe you don't have a great outlook, so it's, maybe less important. You might be able to save $5 or $10 by not having a balcony. Invest that money, $5 or $10 into your garden. Your house is going to be the best looking house in the street. You're still going to have a great looking facade, just doesn't have a balcony that you probably weren't going to use. But you've now tipped that money into your garden, and your garden's going to look absolutely amazing. And particularly as it grows in time, and you keep it well maintained and well fed and well watered, all those things, it's going to look absolutely amazing. So, it's a great way to go. But also, if you've got a prime location that, and you're surrounded by homes that have got superior facades, and you go do something really basic around it, it's going to be very noticeable. So it's picking your audience, picking your spot. You got to be able to afford it, right? And so it's just that juggle, in that, I guess. But yeah, your garden's really important as well. It does form a big part of that facade.
It comes down to the same as we always say: the needs, the wants, the budget. I've seen many people on double story, Darren, pick a facade just because it had a balcony, but they never end up using it because it's usually off the main bedroom or something. So pick something that that relates to how you're going to use the actual house. Because for me, if you got $5,000 there, like you said, Daz, either spend it on landscaping or pop some more upgrades, or 50-50 with that $5,000 into the house. Get some more features, and in the kitchen or in the bathroom, or or out the back somewhere. So that's just my preference. But I do know for sure, if you are, as we said, building that dream home or that second or third home, you're spending good budget on it, then you really should be, not leaving your facade alone. You should be upgrading that as well, in my view as well, for sure. So the one tip, Darren, I've got there for the listeners is, it's only a personal preference, because we've been through this a lot, is my suggestion to you, unless you are happy to maintain it on a regular basis, I would avoid too much timber on a facade. And the reason I say that is because they look, and display homes have a lot of them, they look amazing when they're new. But you fast forward a year or two, and then if you drive through estates now and you see those big, heavily timber featured facades, they look a bit grey, and they look a bit old, and they're a bit drab, because the owner hasn't maintained it. So if you're willing to maintain it, go for it. But my suggestion is, if you're not up for maintaining the facades or things like decking and things like that, then don't choose them. There's probably some nicer
You're
options.
referring to that. You're referring to that true timber look, right? Rather than a painted cladding finish, for example. You're referring to, when you can see it looks like timber, and you're 100% right. Same with timber windows on facades and stuff can be, just
Yeah.
not maintained in any way, and then they deteriorate over time. You've got maintenance headaches, etc., and that's back on you. As the consumer, you've got to maintain that. It's not just warranted under the builder's warranty because you didn't look after it. You've got to actually look after it as well. So
Yeah, that's
great
exactly
advice,
what I
mate.
mean.
Great
The
advice.
cedar, or the actual genuine timber. So there's some great cladding that can replace a timber look cladding that looks amazing, and you don't have to do anything with it. So they're a lot smarter as well these days with what products are available for you also. So I'd say, Darren, one other question I wanted to bring to you: are there any restrictions, or I suppose limits to what you can do with your facade?
Yeah, 100% there are, Colin, and usually it's determined by your estate, but also could be determined by the building surveyor and the requirements by council, etc., that may restrict what that facade can do. Also, often facades, particularly for example, if you get a bigger balcony, so that's going to make the house longer, potentially may mean the house doesn't fit on the block anymore because you've got a limited amount of space on your block. So you might really want this facade with a balcony, and now that pushes the house back because you've got a front setbacks or a minimum distance you've got to be off the street. That now makes the overall house longer into the block, and now you're too close to the back fence now. So it may have some issues there. Also, depending on what that facade does, could have issues around overshadowing the neighbours, heights, etc. Again, if you're too close to a boundary on blocks with some level of fall, you may have some restrictions around heights on boundaries. So all these things sort of can come into play, with, I guess, the design guidelines and the estates driving that. There's some real positives out of that as well. So they may restrict what you can do. So, you may really want to live in a pink shed, and you want a pink shed look at the front of your house. And that might be great for you, but it's not necessarily great for the overall environment. And likewise, in return, you don't want your neighbour building a pink shed next door if you're not into pink sheds. So, because it's going to devalue your property. So, those sort of things are really important. And part of the reason they're there to really control the end outcome so that everyone gets a great looking home, without impeding too much cost onto the consumer, and they're trying to be mindful of that, but they're also mindful that they want the street to look good. I think anyone is, I would say most people are really proud to live where they live, and they want it to look good. So, controlling that environment's, really important. And again, often they'll have rules such as a 1 in 5 rule, meaning that within 5 homes, you can only have one of that facade type. So, again, it protects that, it keeps the difference of street appeal rolling through so that the whole street's not looking the same and looking like Pleasantville, I guess. I guess we'll touch further on design guidelines and stuff, Colin, in the future, but, it does pick up things like even the colours that are used as well. So you're not, again, I mentioned the pink home. It's probably unlikely you're going to get a pink home through in most of the states. So, we want you to be aware of that. They may even go as far as detailing the specific plant species that you're allowed to plant. So they may actually want to see a plan of what you're proposing to plant in there and come back and address that. Even stuff such as your cooling units on the roof can be needed to be lower on the roof so you can't see them from the street, just to maintain that really nice street appeal. So there's all that sort of stuff rolled into one, and it does impact the facade, because if you can see it from the street, it impacts the facade. So another great example would be, I've just put solar panels on my roof, Colin, and we've got them on the west side, and I face the north. So there's no solar panels on the north, which would be the preference area to put them, because they're going to look ugly. Now, we're not governed by a covenant here anymore where I live, but I don't want it looking ugly either. I've got a really nice looking house with a really nice looking facade. The last thing I want to do is bang solar panels everywhere so it looks as ugly as sin. So, those sort of protections, I guess, will be noted. I guess outside of that, there's probably not a lot more to cover. Certainly we mentioned the garden stuff. You can't have a full concrete garden. They might specify certain stuff around fences to the front, etc. That's all facade related. But again, we'll come back and touch on that in the future.
Yeah.
A tricky one, Cole, can be the width of the lot can have a real impact on the facade. So, if you have a 16-meter wide lot with a really big, grand facade, and all of a sudden you're wanting that facade because you like the look of it, it might be a Hamptons look, and you want a Hamptons look on your home, but now your block's only 12 and a half, or it could be 10 and a half, or even 8.5 meters wide. What sort of impact does that have, and how do you suggest is the best way to sort of, get a real idea of what that's going to look like?
Yeah, good question. So this is a common thing I've come across over the years. Is most builders will provide essentially a virtual or rendered image of what that facade option is. Okay, so when you go out there shopping and you're going through display homes or looking through catalogs and this, that, and the other thing online and everything, you'll mostly see virtual renders, not actual photos of facades. And there are different reasons for that. But please, for the listeners, understand that if you've got, let's say 8 or 10 different block widths available times, maybe 12 or 20 facades, that's a lot of virtual renders. So it's just not really financially smart for a builder to go out and do a Darren Brennan facade on an 8.5, a 10.5 lot width. This is 8.5, 10.5, 12.5, 14, 16. Like it's not something that necessarily each builder is going to provide you. So it's important for me to explain that to people. Don't expect that the 12 and a half or the 14 meter example that you see in the brochure online is going to necessarily be exactly what you get, because if the block width is 14 on the example you're viewing, it may have 2 windows and it may have a little bit more brick on it. But if you're going to go and build it on a block that's only 10.5 meters, it may then look and have the same features, but it'll take 1 window away. It will take some brick away because naturally that block is more narrow. And the exact opposite of that for a 16 meter or 18 meter block for people who've got wider blocks, it may add a third window and it may add more brickwork, etc. So just understand that I think people do have a bit of challenge, Darren, understanding how that facade's going to look. So I wanted to finish this off just by giving you guys a couple of tips on how you can get a better understanding as to how the facade you're looking at or liking so far will actually look on your size block. So there's 2 things to do. Number one, obviously, when you're talking to a sales consultant or a builder, try and get the drawings of that home. So if you've picked the John Smith 4 design, then just say, can you please give me the detailed drawings of that design? Because there's not just going to be that bird's eye view. There's actually going to be a thing what we call elevations. And elevation is the side view of the home. So essentially there's elevations of kitchens and laundries and en-suites, but there's also elevations of the external part of the dwelling, the sides, the front and the back. So if you have an elevation of the front of the home in detailed drawings, it will then, in outlines, in drawings, show you exactly what that's going to look on that size block, Darren. So yes, it's going to be only 1 window now, not 2, etc., etc. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step for me has always been ask the sales consultant if there's another house that's already been built. It doesn't have to be, remember, facades are interchangeable. So it doesn't have to be your design. It doesn't need to be the John Smith design. It just could be any floor plan that has that facade built somewhere in wherever you are. So see if the consultant can look up a job and say, look, here's 1 or 2 or 3 addresses with that facade built on that lot width, or at least something really close, and then drive by and you'll have a look at, maybe the house is 3 months old. It could be 12 or 14 months old. At least you'll be able to see how that looks, in real life. So they're the 2 tips I'd provide at the end of this, Daz. I think that really will help people get a better grip, and then drive around estates and you'll start seeing, ever since we mentioned that timber thing, for example, I've just pointed out the red light on the TV by mentioning that. They won't be able to unsee it when they drive. When you guys drive through estates, there's so many things when you're in this game for a while that you'll see, like so much, and then you look through estates in a completely different different lens, I suppose. So yeah, definitely get some examples that have been built if you can, and at the very least get the detailed drawings, look at the elevations, and that should help you get a really good understanding of what your facade will look like.
Absolutely. Colin, one we didn't touch on, I just just thinking of it right now, and apologies we didn't touch on that earlier, but if you're on a corner lot also, often the facade has to treat the corner lot, so the corner side of that home. So the developer will often say that your facade actually wraps around the corner. So if it's a single story, they might be judging 3 or 4 or 5 meters of the side of the home. If it's a 2-story, they'll judge the bottom level for that same sort of distance, but they'll also judge the upper level as well. So often want to see the same sort of look wrapping around, similar windows, etc. Could mean things like eaves, cladding, any of that stuff may need to be represented around the corner of the home so that it looks good. They don't want to have a pretty ugly side of the house or a less attractive, because a facades are the really attractive part, right? So, the rest of the home can look not quite as attractive around the back, but, no one's really looking at it. So it's less important. So, yeah, certainly be mindful that on a corner lot, you may be up for a little bit extra cost, but also your house is going to look better and you're going to be happy with the way that presents. So,
good point.
Sort of throw that one in there.
Good point, because you actually are responsible for addressing both street frontages as a result of that. Yeah, so,
absolutely.
Yeah, there'd usually be some estates don't require much at all, Darren, or just an extra window that matches one at the front, but some require a full-fledged replication of that facade around the corner as well.
Absolutely.
So, good point.
Indeed.
Yeah, good point. Excellent. That about wraps this one up, Darren. I hope you guys have learned a little bit more about facades. Perfect. Again, as always, there's a fee for the podcast, and that is to share it. If you like what you heard, please jump on, give us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to. And I can't recall if we mentioned this at the top, but if you need to know more about myself or Darren, learn about our history experience and the point and the purpose of this podcast, just jump back to episode number 1, which is an introductory episode. And that probably wraps it up. Anything else from you there, Daz, to finish off?
Great, Cole. Any questions you've got, shoot to the website, homebuildinghub.com.au, and we'd be happy to come back with answers or a phone call on any of those questions you've got. We're here to help.
Excellent. Awesome. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks.
1, 2,